And you told Jake, right? Well, hi, everybody. Yeah. Okay, to the public watching, good evening. My name is Steve Bachmiller. I'm the Hagerstown City Zoning Administrator, and this is the monthly meeting of the Hagerstown Board of Zoning Appeals. We have continued deliberations from one case from last month, plus one new case this evening. And with that, I'll turn it over to our chairman, Brian Kurtika.
Thank you, Steve. Good night. Good evening, everybody. Glad you could make it tonight. I'm going to go over the general governing rules for tonight. My name is Brian Kurtika. I'm the Board of Appeals Chair. And with us tonight are Jordy Newman, Aaron Smith, Janice Kelsch, Greg Deck, Jim Stauffer, other members and alternates of the board. The decisions and cases heard tonight are based on general and specific criteria as enumerated in the City of Hagerstown Land Management Code. This is an administrative proceeding. As such, it will be conducted just as if it were a court of law, except that we will not follow as strictly the rules of evidence. Everyone who wishes to be heard on a particular case will be. Each of the cases will be heard in the order filed with the board. Procedure for tonight, we will first hear from the applicant, then all witnesses in favor of the applicant, all witnesses in opposition to the applicant, then if necessary, final remarks from the applicant. Then the board will take the case under advisement or deliberate right after. And if we reach a decision tonight, which is likely, then a written decision would be issued within 45 days after tonight. All parties are welcome to stay after the applicant's case is presented and listen to our deliberations if they wish to, but it's not necessary if you don't want. You can take action on our decision tonight if we grant, but the decision is only final once the written decision is sent out. So if you proceed in advance of that and something happens, you're doing so at your own risk. There is a right to appeal within 30 days of the date of the written decision and order as provided by the board. An appeal may be taken by any party who participated in the hearing and others who may be aggrieved by the decision. Appeal to the Circuit Court of Washington County. Our rules tonight, there's really only two basic rules. Remarks that we will consider are those given from the witness chair under oath, and we ask that you confine your remarks to things pertinent. I will now call the first case, unless there are other administrative items, Steve.
What's that? Yeah, you have that. I have the one deliberation for Mr. Bear's case from the last meeting. Are you going to just do your deliberations together at the end of the meeting and take the testimony for the variance first, or how do you want to handle that?
I would think that we would. Well, I think it's better just to take this first matter first, the one that's on the agenda tonight, and then when we go into deliberations, we'll deliberate last month's case first.
Okay.
And get that out of the way. And then move to this particular deliberations on this case. Is everybody else okay with that? You can signal by waving your hand. Okay, if you're not unmuted.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, actually, I do have one question. At the last meeting, Ms. Kelsch's communication line died on her, and I just need to figure out if whether or not, Janice, if you heard all of the testimony in this particular case, which would allow you to deliberate, or should we pass that on to Aaron as the alternate? Did you hear all of the testimony in Mr. Bear's case?
I did not.
You did not.
Okay. I did not.
If that's the situation, then staff would recommend, Janice, that you defer to Mr. Smith for that particular case. Of course, the other case on the agenda here tonight, you'll hear, assuming your phone doesn't give out on you again.
Isn't that the truth? Oh, yes.
You'll hear all the testimony tonight, and then you can participate in the deliberations for tonight's case. But if you didn't hear all of the testimony in Mr. Bear's case, you probably ought to step aside on that one.
That's fine. Thank you. Thank you for that clarification.
Sure.
All right. With that said, then we'll move to our first case tonight, which is Z 2020-04. And Steve, if you would give us a summary of the case.
Okay, this is case Z 2020-04. The applicant is Margaret Myers. Property is located in the RMED zoning district at 1700 Abbey Lane. The request is for a variance to reduce the required rear setback to 26 feet in order to construct a roof over an existing deck. This application is being made for the reason that under Article 4, Section D5A, the minimum required rear setback is 30 feet in the RMED zoning district. And I'm going to provide you a little bit of explanation on the nature of this particular request in a minute. Your deadline for written decision is July 4. Let's make that July 3 because I'm not writing a decision for you on July 4, sorry.
Yeah.
This is a variance application, so you'll be reviewing the application based on the 6 criteria that the ordinance has for evaluating requests for special exceptions. We received no comment from any of the review agencies. What we have here, just to give you a little bit of background, is the zoning ordinance allows a deck to extend up to 35% into a rear yard setback, but it cannot have a roof over it. So they have a deck that complies with the zoning. It doesn't comply with the main building structure setback, but you're allowed to have a deck go a certain distance into that. But the ordinance specifically says that you can't have a roof over it. Therefore, the variance basically is for allowing the roof over the deck, which is not part of the exception, to cover the deck and go into the rear setback. Is that clear?
That's
okay.
Clear.
That's all I got.
Good.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we will now hear from the applicant or the applicant's representative, if they are on the line.
Mr. Smith, Roger Smith.
Yes.
Okay, you're the applicant. Welcome. Chairman will swear you in.
Okay, I can't see you, but Mr. Smith, if you would raise your right hand and then answer after I give you the oath to take. Do you solemnly promise and declare under the penalties of perjury that the testimony you are about to give this board shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you. If you will state your name and current address for the record, please.
Roger Lee Smith Sr., 1124 Glenwood Avenue, Hagerstown, Maryland, 2174.
Okay, go ahead. That's okay. And then your relationship to the applicant?
Girlfriend.
Okay. What would you like to tell us tonight about this application?
Well, see, we got 27 feet back, okay? But the deck, you know, is 27 feet from the property line, okay?
Right.
Now, to put a roof on, you're only going to use, what, 8-9 inches overhang or something like that, 12 inch.
Okay. All right, and the I understand the distance issue for you. There are some requirements that need to be met, including the unique condition of the property. Can you describe the property to us?
Yeah, it's a big postage stamp. It's not a triangle, you know. It's square. And to put the roof on, it's only going to be like what I said, 12-inch overhang, and it's not going to bother with anything else in the yard. I mean, you still got 26 feet.
All right. Okay, and what are the what am I looking for? Materials that you're going to be using? What's the roof going to look like? Is it going to be shingles? Is it going to be tin? Is it going to be
It's going to be 10.
tin roof?
Yes.
Is it going to be enclosed?
No. The roof. What do you mean?
Well, the roof's going to hang over. Are you then going to put in walls underneath the roof, or is it just going to be closed with windows?
No. Just a porch. Just a porch.
Just a porch roof. Okay, so
Yeah.
it would be open to the elements all year round.
Right.
Okay. So this is just basically to provide some sun protection and rain and so on?
Rain, snow, and stuff like that, yes.
Okay, all right. And how long is Mrs. Myers the first owner of this property? Did she build the home?
Yes, she built it. Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right.
Back in 89.
89. Okay. And have you had any conversations or discussions with your backyard neighbor about what you're planning to do?
No. I talked to a woman across the street, and she said that there ain't nothing wrong with getting the roof put on. You got a nice deck, you know.
Okay.
But the neighbor behind me, you know, we keep to ourselves, you know.
Okay. And this is going to attach to the current roof on the main part of the house up at the top?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So it's going to go all the way up.
Right.
Okay.
Well, not all the way up. For us, that you know, they need to go up. They will.
You don't happen to know the pitch of the roof, do you?
I don't know if contractor put that in there or not in the paperwork.
Let's see. It does not appear.
Okay.
That's okay. It's not. I'm just curious whether it's going to be a more of a, you know, the same pitch as the existing roof up top, or if it's going to be markedly different. Just for aesthetics and visuals for the next door neighbor, the neighbor behind you.
Well, like I say, we ain't got no next door neighbors that, you know, they're like, one side is like 30 feet, 40 feet.
Mm-hmm.
And the other side is like 30 feet from the roadway. And like I was saying, there's nobody in the back here, only one neighbor there. But like I say, we keep to ourselves.
Okay. Did anybody else go out and take a look at this property? No?
Are you talking to me?
No, I'm talking to the other board members. Because
I did, Brian, and and obviously, you know, the question that I had was, according to the variance request, we were looking from 30 feet to 26 feet. Now this is over an existing deck, and I must ask, was there an original variance granted for this deck?
I don't think one was required.
One was not required because there's an exception in the ordinance that allows for uncovered decks to extend up to 35% into the required rear yard.
Yeah.
So
You
the
did
deck
mention
is
that,
okay
Steve.
as long as it doesn't have a roof on it.
Right.
Very good.
Yeah, because looking at a map, I wasn't able to go out and look at the property, but I have pulled it up on a map. It appears that your what I would call your backyard neighbor actually faces 90 degrees to the northeast on Winston Drive. And so your deck is actually, if you're sitting on your deck looking straight back, you're actually looking at the side of their house. Is that correct, Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's not like your deck is looking onto their deck or inside directly into the back side of their house.
Right.
Okay.
Mostly we're looking at a field.
That's right.
And the sole purpose of putting this roof on is just to provide protection from the elements up above. There's
Like
no
that,
other,
like-
there's no other, you know.
Yeah, for the basement, really, you know.
Mhm.
You know,
And
so
Mrs.
water stuff won't seep down in the ground and go into the basement.
Okay, Mrs. Myers doesn't have any kind of, medical condition that would require her to stay out of the sun or anything like that.
No.
Okay. All right. Does anyone else have any other questions for the applicant?
No.
Gordy, anything? You're muted.
Let me
No, I
ask.
don't have any questions.
Okay, Greg.
Let me ask once again, Brian, the applicant, did you ever think about a rollout awning to cover that deck?
No, I really don't want one of them because, we did check it out one time, a long time ago. A lot of money.
Just a question.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Smith. And I will now ask if there is anybody who has indicated a desire to testify in favor of the application.
Nobody signed up.
Nobody signed up. All right. Is there anybody who has signed up to testify in opposition?
Nobody signed up.
Okay. They're kind of easy there.
Yep.
All right. And I'll give Mr. Smith just one more thing. Do you have anything else to add for us?
Do I have anything else to add? No.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. All right. We will close the testimony portion of this matter, and we will deliberate in a few minutes on this after we finish up with our previous case from last week. Okay. So you can stay on the line if you'd like. All right. Okay, let's
Brian,
try.
can I suggest if he's going to stay on the line that we just go ahead and deliberate this so he doesn't have to sit through what potentially could be long?
I don't have a problem with that. Is Mr. Bear or anybody from the last month's matter online?
Thought he was.
Because I don't see.
Okay. Okay. So no, there's nobody online.
Okay, then yeah, then rather than making Mr. Smith wait, we can take his first. I thought if Jake or somebody was on the line for that, we owe them the favor of doing them first. Okay, thanks, Jordy. All right, so this is a variance request, and there are 6 conditions. I should say 6 criteria that are required to be satisfied. The first is that there be a unique condition of the property. And the ordinance says, whereby due to exceptional narrowness, shallowness, shape, topographical conditions, or other unusual situations or conditions peculiar to a specific parcel of property or the use of the property, the strict applications of these regulations would result in peculiar or unusual practical difficulties to or undue hardship upon the owner of the property. Looking at the application and the drawings that were submitted with this, as Mr. Smith mentioned, this is kind of a postage stamp lot. Looks maybe a little bit wider than deep, but is nevertheless it doesn't appear to be in any kind of unusual configuration. And looking at similar properties situated on Abbey Lane and Winston Drive, they all appear to be kind of somewhat carved out in a regular subdivision kind of manner. Very similar distances from the street and between the lots. So I'm not sure if there is an exceptional condition other than that the lot is a corner lot and the back of this property doesn't face the back of another property. It faces the side of a property that's on an adjoining road or a perpendicular road. Would this is strict application resulting in peculiar or unusual practical difficulties to or undue hardship upon the owner of the property? I mean, the deck is still usable without the roof. And would it be an undue hardship to strictly apply this requirement? The deck is sticking out 26 feet. And I believe that Mr. Smith has testified in his drawing seemed to indicate that the roof would only overhang approximately another foot for the eaves or the eaves up it. So we're talking about another foot extending into the backyard. We're still well within the 33% that's allowable for a deck itself. Even with that extra foot, you're only talking about a 4-foot encroachment into the setback. So let's ponder that for a bit and go on to the next one. Is this the minimum necessary to afford relief? The variance requested is the minimum reasonably necessary to overcome the unusual conditions applicable to the property. Putting aside unusual conditions right now, is it the minimum reasonably necessary? I think for a standard roof of the type that they want to put on this property, it probably is the minimum. You don't want it right to the edge of the deck because then, it's not providing as much protection. And typically the roofs extend a little bit over the structure just to provide that extra weather protection. So this does seem to me to be the minimum necessary. Third criterion is compliance would preclude common use. The literal interpretation of the provisions of the article would deprive the applicant of uses commonly enjoyed by other similar properties in the same district under the terms of the article. Literal interpretation deprive the applicant of uses commonly enjoyed. I'm not sure if there are other properties that have received roof variances back along this area in the subdivision or nearby. And would it deprive them of uses commonly enjoyed? As I mentioned, the deck is still usable.
Brian, as I rode through the neighborhood, I did not see any other decks that had permanent coverings over them. I will say that.
Okay. All right. Fourth criterion is no special privilege. The granting of the variance would not confer on the applicant any special privilege that is denied by this article to other lands or structures with the same zoning. Confer any special is denied. If we were considering another property in a similar situation, requesting a similar type of setback for a similar structure, I don't think this would be a special privilege per se. The fifth criterion is self-created hardship. No variance shall be granted in any case where the applicant, owner, or their agent has created or caused to be created a situation which would or has necessitated the issuance of a variance in order for such property to comply with this article. this is the one that I had the biggest hang up with, and why I asked if Mrs. Myers is the one that had the home constructed. Because this home was constructed after zoning ordinances took effect. And in that case, this may be a self-created hardship. If they had kept their deck within the setback, or at least a foot behind the setback, there wouldn't be a need for a variance.
Brian, do we know if the deck was part of the original construction?
We don't, but it had to have occurred at some point during Mrs. Myers' ownership, because she's the original owner.
Right. I mean, I'm just thinking if you added that on after you had built the house, you may not have taken those measurements into account.
You wouldn't necessarily have taken the measurements into account when you built the house, but certainly you would take the measurements into account when you build the deck, knowing that
Right,
there's
but you can't move the house a couple feet to
but
give
you
you the
can
leeway you need.
But you can build a smaller deck.
Well, not if you're going to have a grill and all the furniture and cooler and
20. How far does this deck stick out from the home?
26.
What's the dimensions of the deck?
I believe it's 10
Hard
feet
to tell.
deep,
10 feet deep?
I believe.
Okay, and then Jordy's point is well taken, because it's not a very wide deck.
Looks like it's 10
So,
by 29.
Yeah, so if you kept it to, to the 30-foot line, you'd have to back it up by 3 feet. You'd only have a 7-foot deck. Heck, you'd have to back it up to a 6-foot deck in order to have the roof overhang. And that would be narrow.
The drawing with the exhibit says it's 10 feet.
10 feet, good. Thank you, Steve. Yeah, so that is a pretty narrow deck if you were to conform to the setback, even if you thought at some point you might want to put a roof on.
Just to be clear, the drawing is for the roof. It's 10 feet. I think the deck may only be like 9.
9 feet, yeah. Yeah, so it is a very narrow deck nevertheless. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And again, creating a hardship is a hardship created through intentional, or is it an intentionally created hardship, or is it not? I don't know. Created or caused to be created.
Well, the main purpose of this is just for the protection against the weather. Is that correct?
That's what Mr. Smith has testified, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And he mentioned also to allow the water to run off further away from the home, so that the basement or the bottom level of the home wouldn't be affected by rain,
okay.
by rain against the foundation, I guess, in that area. I'm not
Well,
sure.
will that cause any concern though?
In what way?
With how the water would be rerunning.
Well, I think if the water comes off, it's still going to be on their property, on Mrs. Myers' property. If it comes off the end, furthest part of the roof away from the home, it's still going to come on their property. So I don't think we're talking about a diversion of water that would cause a big problem. Because if there's 30-foot setbacks, you're talking from wall to wall. If the other house has, the other house, it's a side setback, not a rear setback. So if the side, that might be a little less, but still you're talking well over 30 feet from the main part of the home to the edge of their lot. So I don't think any runoff from this roof would affect a neighboring property for sure. As Mr. Smith mentioned, it could provide some protection from water running off the deck or coming down right there and settling against the foundation of their home.
Okay.
Or Mrs. Meyer's home, right? Mrs. Meyer's home.
Well, and aesthetically, I think the roof is going to look better than an awning.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, they tend to. Yeah, it's more durable and long lasting. I know those awnings, those vinyl awnings and so on, they can get ragged after a while and they fade.
And
they fade
unattractive.
with sunlight and everything, yeah. Okay. Lastly, criterion consistent with the intent of the ordinance. The granting of the variance will be in harmony with the general purpose and intent of the article and will not be injurious to the neighborhood or otherwise detrimental to the public welfare. I do think that it's in harmony with the general purposes to allow people reasonable use of their properties such that it is not injurious to the neighborhood or otherwise detrimental. This doesn't seem like it would be detrimental per se. You're putting the roof structure directly over the top of the deck and there's only an additional 1 foot overhang. It's not too, and you still have then 26 feet to the back line of the lot. So there's quite a distance before you hit the adjoining neighbor's property. And that property owner has not come forward to object at this point, at least. So I think that that it would be consistent with the intent. So I think that one is okay. Any other comments or questions, concerns?
Brian, this is Greg. I have to ask Steve a question. Okay, Steve, you said that a roof over an existing deck is not allowed. I could not find anything in the ordinance that stated that.
If you go into the residential zoning district section and you have the use setback chart, which is on or about page 4-17. The next page after that, there's an explanation of footnotes. And what it boils down to is you have a required rear yard setback of 30 feet. I mean, you have to build your house, you have to provide at least a 30-foot rear yard. But there's an exception in those footnotes that says if you want to build a deck without a roof, you can go 35% into that required setback. In other words, you still have to that deck still has to be at least 65% of that 30-foot rear setback from the rear property line, which comes out to roughly 20 feet. But it specifically says that it has to be an open deck without roof. So you don't qualify for that exception if you're putting a roof over it. So whenever they put that deck on, whether it was when the building was originally built or later on, with this exception in place, the deck doesn't extend more than 35% into the required rear yard setback, so they could build a deck without a roof. Had they applied for a covered porch, which is different than a deck without a roof, then they would have had to gone through this process. They would have so there's there's an exception for what's there, but putting a roof over it negates the exception.
Thank you. So as I understand you now, if the deck was narrower, they could have a permanent roof over it.
As long as the permanent roof was at least 30 feet from the rear property line.
Okay, I got you. All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Steve, do you know what why is that? Why does the city allow the deck but not a roof above?
This is something that's been in the regulations since before I was here, and I've been here 17 years. So I don't know the legislative history.
I'm just curious.
But I can offer you a reasonable presumption. We are a city. We
Mhm.
don't have very big setback requirements compared to a suburban ordinance, with larger lots and all. A 30-foot rear yard is not a particularly large rear yard.
Right.
Okay, if you want to put a deck into it, there's an exception for that. But when you start putting roofs on it, then all of a sudden you're starting to consume your open space in your rear yard area. If everybody was allowed to do a roofed deck in 35% into it, then all of a sudden your entire rear yard now could be as little as 20 feet, which is maybe the width of this room.
1/3.
So the idea is to maintain the sense of open space in people's rear yards. Now keep in mind, as long as you set the main building back more than 30 feet, you can build a covered porch as big as you want. It's all a function of the size and configuration of the property. If you build a house and the back of the house is, and I'm just going to pick a random number, 60 feet from the rear property line, you can build a pretty hefty covered porch off the back of that house. And even as long as you keep it 30 feet from the rear property line, 60 feet, you have a 30-foot rear covered porch. So I believe the provision was there to maintain some semblance of a rear yard, because our ordinances don't require particularly large yards as an urban ordinance.
Right.
But and also, in theory, sometimes when people put roofs over decks and stuff like that, or over porches, what's the next thing they want to do? They want to enclose it.
Close it. Mm-hmm.
So then you got a building addition into the rear setback at that point. If somebody was to do that, propose that and be allowed to move forward with it.
Right.
Yeah, that's why I asked if it was going to remain open or if they were going to put walls under it. Okay. Yeah, now I will.
And no one else has one in the.
Greg just indicated on his drive-by he didn't see one on another home.
No.
Mm-hmm.
I must
So
admit,
that'll be the next.
I did see some screened-in porches, and I certainly didn't get out and measure the distance from the porch to the property line. So,
Steve, would we be having this conversation if it was going to be awning?
A retractable awning?
Yes.
No.
Yeah, because it's not considered a roof.
Interesting.
It's movable. I mean, a retractable awning, you're going to roll it up at the end of the day and it's gone. It's not really a structure.
I guess it's like a fixture, isn't it?
Kind of, yeah.
They serve the same purpose. I mean, practically, it's the same difference.
Well, except for one's there 24/7 once it's built, whereas the other is not.
right.
It's probably spends most of its time rolled up.
Although you could keep it open all the time.
In theory, yeah.
Good.
Which I do with mine most of the time, unless it's snowing.
Yeah, because and I've seen some decks that have those, it's like posts off the corners, and then they put almost like joists. And then they have stuff in between the joists, like canvas or something like that.
A pergola.
A pergola. There you go. I couldn't think of the word. And that's a more permanent structure, but not considered a roof.
I don't think I've been asked that question, as zoning administrator, when with somebody applying for a building permit, so I don't know how I would answer that.
All right.
So right in the same area, there were closed-in porches.
I did see
Perhaps,
a few closed-in porches, but Janice, I mean, they could have been well within the variance guideline or the ordinance guidelines. I did not get out and measure the distance from the porch to the, okay.
the deck itself looks pretty nice from a Google view, street view. It doesn't look like it's in bad condition. It almost looks, well, it's very well maintained. It almost looked like new wood when I saw it. The picture was a year or two old, but it looked pretty new and it had red, white, and blue bunting on it. It was very nice.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Let me see.
Well, we need to move to a decision on this. Does it satisfy these criteria? Is the property unique enough to say that strict application would result in peculiar or unusual practical difficulties or undue hardship upon the owner?
I would say
Well, they would get wet if it rained. Otherwise, they wouldn't. But if you consider that a hardship, I mean, your covering would put you out of the weather. We're talking about 4 feet.
In part, it all depends on how the rain is. It'll still get wet.
Your staff would encourage you to focus on uniqueness of property. Every property gets rained on.
Yes, that's true.
Yes, it does.
And as I mentioned,
and snow. And
as I
snow.
mentioned at the beginning, the only really unique, and it's not totally unique, but somewhat unique, is that this is a corner lot. All the homes next to it on this drive all face the same direction. And this is the only one at the corner that the rear lot faces the side of the home in back of it. That's the only unique situation there. And that means that there, if I'm not mistaken, the side setback is even shallower than a rear setback. So it's not like we got 30 feet and 30 feet. We got 30 feet and something less to the side of that house. And even that, but on the other hand, even though it's less, it's the side of the house, not the back of the house. I could not tell if there were windows on that side of the house. That somebody might, be looking out the window and all of a sudden something's getting closer to their property with a roof on it instead of just a deck.
I mean, in the big picture, we're talking about a couple feet, and it's not going to have an impact on any of the neighbors. I guess I don't think it's that
That may be
big of a deal.
Yeah, that may be the case, but does it satisfy the criterion? Is there a unique condition?
It doesn't appear to be anything unique about the property when you look at all the other houses around it and surrounding neighborhoods as well.
Yeah, I agree that this seems like a very minor intrusion, but that's not, we can't overlook the criterion just because of that.
Right. I mean, I actually pulled up a Google search of the location, and I would say it's not unique.
Yeah. And there does appear to be a big, and now that I'm looking at a satellite view, there does appear to be a very large bay window on the side of the home the property in question, the rear facing. There's a big bay window on it at the ground and the first floor level.
Right in the front by the 2-car garage.
No, I'm talking about the adjoining, the neighbor property has a big bay
window. Oh, the
window.
neighbor property. Okay, the neighbor property.
The neighbor property has a big bay window on the first floor that looks immediately at this deck.
Oh, okay. Oh, mm-hmm.
Well, I'd rather look at a roof than an awning.
But again, we got to come back to, is there a unique condition about this property?
I'd say no, but that's
That would,
what I'm visualizing.
peculiar.
I'd have to agree. I don't see any unique condition of the
No,
property.
it's not. No, I don't. Mm-mm.
All right. Well, I'm going to walk through the rest. Even if we may all agree, or many of us may agree that number one is not being satisfied here. I would still like to
Yeah,
walk
I mean,
through
unfortunately, by the letter of the law, it doesn't sound like it's a unique property.
Right. Yeah. Let's look at the second one, minimum necessary to afford relief. In my opinion, yes, this is the minimum to give. If they could make this a 2-foot extension. You know, it's only a 1-foot extension, which seems pretty reasonable for a roof overhang. It doesn't seem like it needs to be more, or it should be more, and making it less would make it look awkward. Criterion 3, compliance would preclude common use. Would literal interpretation deprive the applicant of uses commonly enjoyed by other similar properties in the same district?
Well,
Literally,
it might look it'll look different than the other houses around it. But because no one else has a similar,
right. I mean, we're
other
not,
than some screened in ones.
yeah, we're not depriving uses commonly enjoyed. It still can be used as a deck. It's not taking
That's
away
very true.
the function of the deck. It's just, it doesn't have a cover over top, a permanent roof cover over top.
Right.
And if others do, and they are within the setback, you know, that makes it different. It's not similar to them. It's not a similar property. A similar property would be one that was facing the same conditions. So I'm not sure if the owner is being deprived of uses commonly enjoyed by other similar properties. No special privilege. Granting the variance would not confer on the applicant any special privilege denied by the article to other lands or structures with the same zoning. I mean, the article still requires that variances meet these criteria. And we've already gotten one, perhaps two, that are already not met. So if we did grant this, we would be conferring a special privilege that would be denied to others. Is it a self-created hardship? The deck was built by the owner many years ago, but still it was built by the owner and extends far enough that a roof over top is now going to be over the setback line. So whether they intended that or not, I think it's self-created.
Yes.
I grant you that backing it up by 4 feet would make it a very narrow deck, and nobody would want a 5 or 6 foot wide deck. It just doesn't make sense. But it's not the intent that's here. It's whether it was or was not created by the owner. If this was a previous owner that did this, that wouldn't be the case. This owner would be stuck with whatever they bought. I think that that's another one that it doesn't meet. And then is it consistent with the intent of the ordinance? Is granting the variance in harmony with the general purpose and intent and would not be injurious to the neighborhood or otherwise detrimental to public welfare? Is it injurious to the neighborhood? That's a pretty harsh thing. I don't think that having a 1 foot overhang beyond the deck would be necessarily injurious to the neighborhood, or detrimental to the public welfare. But the fact that we've got other criteria that it may not satisfy, that's probably not keeping in with the general purpose and intent of the article. That's all I've got. I wish I could come up with more to satisfy these, but I don't see it.
I unfortunately agree with you.
Yeah, it seems like such a minor thing, and I wish that there was a way that we had some sort of de minimis exception or something like that, but we don't in this situation. We're stuck with the code as written, and it's a shame that they can't do what they would like to do. I think we all have sympathy for this homeowner, but we also have a duty to abide by the ordinance, and I can't see a way to overcome at least half of these. So I'm going to ask for a motion to approve or deny.
I'll make a motion to deny.
Do I have a second?
I second.
Jim, and then
Okay, that's Jim who's moving and Janice who has seconded.
Yeah.
And now I will call for a voice vote on the motion to deny. Jordy?
I vote in favor.
In favor of?
In favor of the motion.
Granting? In favor of the motion, okay.
Favor of the motion.
So
In favor of the motion.
Okay, and Janice has seconded. You're in favor of the motion, Janice?
I am.
Okay, and Greg?
Yes, I also agree with the motion.
Jim?
Yep.
And Jim? Yes. And I,
Yes.
unfortunately, also agree with the motion is made. So I'm sorry to the applicant, but it's a unanimous denial.
Mr. Chairman, just so that we're clear, I was taking notes on your deliberations, and it looks like it doesn't meet criteria based on your deliberations. Criteria 1, 2, 3, 4, and no, I'm sorry. 1, 3, 4, 5, and 6. It looks like the only one that meets is minimum to afford relief.
Yeah.
I believe that's
my
correct.
understanding of your discussion.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that is how I read it too. Yes.
Okay.
All right.
Mhm.
To the applicant, we will issue a written decision no later than 45 days. As Mr. Bachmiller pointed out, that would be by July 3rd. And if you would like to, once that decision comes out, you would have 30 days to appeal to the Circuit Court of Washington County. Okay, we'll close the deliberations and vote on that then with that. All right, that matter is now over. We'll move to the.
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Yes, thank you, sir. All right, we'll move to the one from last month, the thing out here. This is variance application, application Z 2020-02. If you recall, this was for a brew pub / restaurant / brewery with a tap room, including 2,000 square feet of customer space. I will note for the record that at that last meeting, we did decide to postpone our deliberation to keep things, close the testimony portion and postpone our deliberation so that we could get advice from the city attorney on the issue of whether a property in a commercial zone, a business in a commercial zone, if it were to use parking on another parcel that was in a residentially zoned district, if we were to allow that, would that become binding precedent on similar cases moving forward with similar fact patterns? And we electronically communicated with the city attorney in that regard, by phone, email, and or at least our staff did to reach out to them and ask. And we got a response today from the city attorney advising us on that. Did everybody get a chance to look at that?
Yes.
I did.
We want to unmute Aaron.
Aaron, did you get a chance to look at it too?
I did not.
Okay.
Was that in the emails that were sent today?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can read it up real quick and
Yeah.
Get
Just take a look at it and let me know once you're ready.
okay. Okay, I got it.
Okay. All right. So this was a special exception use was being sought for the brew pub to be here in this mixed use in this district, the commercial local district. And I believe that during our deliberations, we had at last month, we had discussed whether this was satisfied the criteria for special exception. And that's when we ran into this issue about the parking. Let me go back to the special exception here. And for this type of so this particular property did not have sufficient space on it to accommodate parking beyond the limited number of spaces it had for the second and third story tenants in the apartments above the business space. And so the applicant had talked with, I believe it was St. Mark's Church, that is like right around or right on the other side of the block or so through an alleyway. And the church was willing to allow them to use their parking lot, which has many more spaces than are required under the ordinance for this type of business, except for when the church itself was using it for services and so on. And so, you know, our decision tonight has to be whether we want to grant the special exception to allow this business to function under that situation, to have off-site parking in a residentially zoned area. Given the city attorney's opinion on this, you know, we want to be careful how we address it, since this may set a course for future appeals that are difficult that would be almost required to be granted. So if we do agree to this, no problem, we're done. Special exceptions approved, and they can use the parking at the church with whatever conditions we want to place on that use. If we deny it, then we move to whether or not we want to grant a variance from the parking requirements, which would basically be to allow them to have 0 on-site parking or available parking under their control, and just everybody would have to find space on the public streets or in a parking garage and walk to this facility. So we've kind of got a 2-step analysis. First, to decide whether we want to grant the special exception with them having the use of the church parking lot in another zone district. And if we do, we're done. If we don't, we move on to whether we will allow a variance for no parking spaces. So the criteria.
Mr. Chairman, just as a clarification, if you all determine that the church parking lot cannot be used, and then you also do not grant the variance, then the special exception fails because it can't meet the requirements.
Right.
So that's kind of the unspoken third alternative.
Yes. Yes. Gotcha. Thank you. Okay, so Are the characteristics of the use and operation of this property in question as proposed, will it create any greater adverse impact than the operation of such use on any other property with the same zoning? I mean, I think that the obvious thing is if we allow this special exception with the parking lot, it's taking away the greater adverse impact. It's keeping the parking perhaps less on the streets and on the church parking lot. So that at least it would not materially or adversely affect adjoining and surrounding properties. If they're parking in the church parking lot, that's certainly better than parking on the street in public spaces where people, as we heard from one property owner who testified, he has difficulty parking in his space in front of his own home because already there's limited parking spaces around there. So allowing it to be on the church parking lot would make that adverse impact less on the residents in the neighborhood.
But didn't
But
the church
Brian,
have to give an
Brian,
exception?
if I might interject, he also said if the place in front of his house was open, rather than parking at the church parking lot, someone would park in front of his house.
That's correct.
Correct.
That's correct. Yeah, I'm not saying it would eliminate it. Yes, Steve.
Just as a point of procedure to maybe make this go a little bit more in an understandable line, you might want to discuss in its own context the issue of the parking. And it sounds like you're kind of doing that, but you're also kind of going into the criteria of the special exception. And I think whether or not this thing will meet the criteria of the special exception is going to hinge on how you determine the issue of that parking lot. So staff would suggest maybe that you focus on that parking lot issue in and of itself first, and that'll give you the context once you come to a conclusion on what the appropriate route is on that. Then it gives you the direction that you can go through the special exception criteria and, if necessary, the variance.
Okay. I think I was proceeding under the assumption that, okay, if we grant this, if we say, yes, it's okay to use this parking, then does that use, if we assume that it's okay, does it meet the special exception criteria?
Okay.
I mean, it doesn't make sense to address the criteria if we decide that it's not okay to use the parking lot.
No,
So
but
I
what
was
you would do is if you decide that it's not okay to use the parking lot, you still need to address the criteria of the special exception with the context of also the variance laid on top of it.
Yes. Yes. Okay.
So,
okay.
Just a suggestion.
Yeah, no, that's well taken. I think, yeah, this is a somewhat complicated procedural way of that we have to deal with this.
And I am not looking forward to writing this one. Regardless of what you decide, it's going to be a very complex decision to write.
I'm sure we're going to
Sounds
give
like
you
he's
an
a-
awful lot to put down. And we will have to look over it very carefully, as we normally do. Yeah, so we do have the ability to grant special exceptions as a board under the provisions of the ordinance, and we do have to decide whether it's going to affect the community, the local community here, and will it comply with all the other conditions and requirements that are required in that zoning district. So my own opinion is whether it complies with the ordinance or not. We'll get to that later, but getting the parking on another property, yes, it's in a residential district. We have two things to think of. We have quantity and quality. The quantity is this is going to be every day of the week that they're going to be parking in the church parking lot to use this business. There's the potential for cars to be parking there every day of the week. and a lot more Monday through Friday / Saturday than ordinarily would be there. And then that's the quantity issue. And then the quality issue is it opening up more opportunities for there to be parking on the streets for residents if some of the parking is handled over there? So the quality is, I think it does give the residents a little bit of relief so that they don't have 30, 40, 50 other cars competing for public spaces. And
Brian,
yes,
correct me if I'm wrong. Didn't the church have to get a special exemption to be able to use that parking lot in the first place?
I believe that church parking lot's probably been there decades.
It's part of their property. So,
I mean, the church goes back into the 1800s. Obviously, the parking lot doesn't, but I don't know how old that lot is, but I would speculate it goes back a long time.
I parked there. My father parked there when he took me to Sunday school when I was 5 years old, and I'm 72 now. So it's been there a long time.
Sounds like a special exception use that's too old to have required to have had a special exception use.
Yeah.
But Brian,
if that business, if that church were,
let's let Jordy finish.
If that church were to go in there today, they would have to have a special exception for a parking lot, correct? Because it's residential.
I think churches.
Churches in residential zoning districts are permitted uses if they comply with all current design and standards and building setbacks.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say St. Mark's wanted to buy this property now and it was just a grassy field. In theory, they could do it as part of their use as long as they design that parking lot to all current parking lot design standards, which it doesn't do, but it's 70 years old.
Yeah, they could.
I mean, today, if you were to get a site plan for a parking lot, the expectation is there would be 10 feet of landscaping between the sidewalk and the parking lot, 10 feet of landscaping along the side property lines, parking stall widths, lengths, all that kind of stuff would all play into it. Certain landscaping, tree requirements, things like that for current parking lot standards, which this one, due to its being 70 years old, was built long before any of those requirements were in place.
Mm-hmm.
So the short answer is yes, but not in its current configuration.
Right.
But Brian,
Mm-hmm.
don't you think the key here is the city attorney's email? I'm not sure I would want to set a precedence that would bound our hands in the future looking across two different zoning districts.
Right. That is the overall. I mean, like I said, you got quantity and quality, but then you also have the legal on top of it. And if this does have the potential to set a precedent. Now, it only sets a precedent if you've got a similar set of facts, similarly situated properties. I mean, there's always the opportunity for somebody to come and say, well, I'm using off-space parking in residential property, but they're doing, maybe it's, half a mile away from their facility. Maybe it only provides less parking or more parking. You don't know, or the type of business is completely different. So I don't know if it would set a precedent unless it was extremely close to the fact situation that we have here. Precedent is important, but it's also bound by the reason why the precedent came about. So you have to then look at the underlying facts that resulted in the precedent. Because there's exceptions to precedents made all the time, and it's because of fact differences. So I think in this case, yes, we have to be mindful of that. It could cause us, we might find ourselves, or even future boards might find themselves faced with a very similar situation, and they might not be able to get around it, and it may have uncomfortable or unwanted consequences as a result.
I think Brian summarized it quite well. You need to be aware of the precedent, but for a precedent to stick, the next one coming in making the same claim has to have a set of circumstances very, very similar to this, not anything, but something very similar to this. Does that sound about right, Brian?
Yes, that's what I was driving at. Yep. Yeah. So the likelihood is there, but it's small. You know, it's in the city. Do we have big parcels with sufficient parking located close to, in a residential zone, close to a commercial? Yeah, see, that's the other thing. It's got to be commercial business in a commercial district trying to use residential parking. Can't be the reverse. You know, because that would be too dissimilar. It would be too dissimilar. Not that anybody would want to do that, but if somebody built a multi-family apartment building, and then there was a strip mall across the street, commercial district, you know, oh, we'll use their parking for our residents. We'll have an agreement with the shop owner. Okay, that's like this, but it's not factually similar enough because you're talking about the reverse zoning situation. And one parking's on the other side of the zone. So yeah, I don't know if this would rear its head that often, but it could, and it could be proved to be detrimental to somebody's properties.
Also, do remember that the provision allowing the off-site parking is limited to it being within 500 feet. This is, I think, well within, I think it's like about maybe 300.
Yeah.
But just be aware that this provision that allows the off-site parking is not unlimited. You can't say, 10 blocks away, a mile and a half away, we're going to do it, because that doesn't qualify. It's has to be within 500 feet.
500 feet.
Yes, and they're let's see. Yeah, their application says that it's less than 500 feet distant from the property in question. And we also have to remember that, as was pointed out in the last meeting, the ordinance is written in such a way and interpreted in such a way that things that are not included are presumed to not be available. Is that correct, Steve?
Yes, it's an exclusionary ordinance.
It's an exclusionary ordinance. So there's nothing in here that says this can be done. And so that's the starting point.
So we would be actually rewriting the ordinance? Basically.
Our decision.
You're not really rewriting the ordinance. What you're doing, and the reason why this is in front of you, and I didn't make a call myself as zoning administrator, because there is sufficient gray area where if I made a determination one way, somebody could appeal me to you all. If I determined it the other way, the other side could appeal me to you all. So it made no sense for me to make this call. So it's a gray area. The provision of the ordinance says that you can do off-site parking within 500 feet.
In the same district.
It doesn't say that. That's the point.
Yeah.
It just says within 500 feet. But then the question becomes, but can you have parking for a commercial use in a residential zoning district? That's why we have this situation where it's a gray area subject to, this is one of those rare cases. We don't run into these very often, but this is truly an interpretive situation of the ordinance. When it's all said and done, who knows, maybe we may find that we need to button up the ordinance a little bit as a result of this case. I don't know that yet. But what you have here is actually an interpretation of the ordinance to be made. The ordinance says you can provide parking within 500 feet. It doesn't specifically say it's got to be in the same zoning district. But then again, the zoning ordinance says in that zoning district, you could do these uses and not those uses. So I'm dumping it in your lap is what I'm doing.
Would it be fair to say that there is a presumption of exclusion, a presumption that this is not allowed because it's not in there?
It could be argued either way.
Yeah.
Like I said, I don't want to do anything more than give you the background.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to be making,
That's our
you know,
decision.
I,
Yeah,
I
that's
don't
our
think it's
decision.
appropriate for me to be making this
Sure.
decision. I mean,
Sure.
I could have made the interpretation and just live with whatever appeal I did. And I'm not going to try to couch anything that I say that would give away which direction I would go on it.
Yep.
So I'm literally dumping it in your laps.
Yep. So we have to decide whether, if there is a presumption of exclusion, and I think there is a presumption of exclusion, and that's how ordinances tend to be interpreted, is if it's not in there, where it's not allowed unless the circumstances are gray, as Steve mentioned, that we could allow it. But that overcoming that presumption, I think, would have to have strong reasoning.
And what are the conditions that we would want to put on it if we're going to say yes? I mean, what are the types of conditions we can put on it?
Well, one of the things that I think had come up through some of the comments that we heard from some of the persons on the line at the hearing, and through our initial beginnings of the deliberation, was you've got people who are leaving a facility where they're consuming alcohol. Some of them, I won't say all, but some of them may consume alcohol. And then they're going across through an alley, currently it seems like an unlit alley that is maybe not the safest in the world, and going over to this parking lot. So the residences that they're walking by as they go to the parking lot, they express some concern about public drunkenness. Who knows what's going to happen? Loud noises, fights. They're not supposed to be taking alcohol containers out with them from an establishment like this. They may have off-site purchase, but I'm not sure. I don't know all the details of what kind of license they would be getting there. But you don't know what you can encounter when alcohol is in the mix. And so that would be one issue. The second is the safety of the patrons as they walk almost 500 feet, 300, 400 feet to this parking lot. How safe is it? They're crossing streets to do that, rather than it being on the property itself where they wouldn't have to venture into traffic, perhaps. I don't even know is there even a crosswalk at that location, or do they have to walk down to the corner to get to a crosswalk? We know how people are. They don't do that. They jaywalk. They take the shortest line to the nearest, to where they want to go. So now you've got people who may have consumed alcohol, maybe a little tipsy, walking across at night, perhaps across a busy street to get to a parking lot, walking through a dark alley. At this point, it's dark. We don't know if they'll get permission to light some of the alley or whatever, but you know, that's a concern. If it was a lit parking lot, properly lit, approved parking lot on site, most of that goes away. Being off-site at the church, all of that comes into play. And we do have to think about what the residents, you know, how does this affect the community? Steve?
Jim, you had asked the question, what kind of conditions, if you were to approve it, could you put on it? In our staff report, we actually had some recommended conditions if you were to move in that direction at the bottom of page 4 in the staff report.
Okay.
And I'm looking at an air photo. Washington Avenue, when it goes through Washington Square, is a nonstop. So there is no marked crosswalk there, according to air photos.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
But you know, Steve, I mean, you're number 3. Do you really think that is going to be adhered to? I mean,
yeah,
you know, I don't know how you could force them.
Well, I think what that tends to do is it may limit the liability of the business owner, because he's providing signage telling people don't jaywalk here, you know, don't you know, go here, not there, to get to the parking lot. But if they choose to ignore that and they get hit by a car, hey, we told you what to do, you didn't follow the directions. So And I mean, it is for their own safety. So, but again, people who are inebriated, they're not thinking about their own safety that clearly. I mean, I would love to have a facility like this downtown. I think it's it sounds like it's going to be more upscale than what we're used to at some of the drinking establishments, and somewhat unique.
Well, we did hear about the neighborhood though, Brian. It's it's not a I'll say a pristine neighborhood without crime.
Correct. Now, the applicant did indicate that part of what they're hoping is that this is going to change that, at least be the beginnings of a change in the neighborhood to draw, people who want to patronize this facility. It may draw other businesses, similar types of businesses that, not alcohol business, but similar types of upscale businesses into the area. I mean, somebody has to plant a flag somewhere in order for it to develop. I mean, we see that in the downtown core around the public square with a couple of establishments that have done that, and it has expanded a little bit out in all directions, and it's getting better. So yeah, right now it's not the best neighborhood in the world, but it's not everybody's at fault for that. There's a lot of residents there that are just trying to live their life, and having a better commercial establishment like this might help improve the neighborhood down the road. Jim, if you also, to respond back directly to you, the conditions were, should St. Mark's parking lot no longer be available to provide parking, then the use shall cease operation and comply with the zoning ordinance. Compliance could be in the form of concluding the brew pub use, operating without use of the church parking lot if that is compliant with the zoning ordinance at such time in the future, obtaining a new special exception and variance with or without new off-site parking, or other means in conformance with the zoning ordinance as the time arises. And I say that out loud just in case any of the other members don't have this in front of them. And then the other condition was, should the use of the church lot be approved, staff also recommends a condition that requires signage in the brew pub and at the church parking lot directing patrons around the front of the church. And then perhaps staff would be able to explore whether it would be appropriate and allowed to post signs in the alley, but that's not necessarily a condition. It's not a condition.
Well, okay, so the other way to look at this is, we talked about crossing the street, and we talked about those things. If we said no to this, people are still going to park there, right? We can't stop them from parking there, so they can choose to park there.
Well, if we approve the variance to go to zero parking requirement.
Right. If we said no to the lot, but approve that, we couldn't stop people from parking there. So the issues of crossing the street, being inebriated when they do that, those risk factors are still present.
That's correct. And yeah, it's still present. It's still there.
So let's get back to the parking lot. That's the key here, right? Brian, I'm going to defer to you. You're the attorney here. I mean, what do you think? What do you think about this going across two different zoning districts?
Well, I'm looking at it. I mean, my allegiance is to the ordinance here. And as an attorney, I tend to look at the law and first with a very strict eye, and then I start to look for the gray areas. So legally, there's nothing in the ordinance that prohibits it, but we do have this presumption of exclusion, not an outright, you can't ever do it, period, but there's a presumption that can be overcome if we say, hey, we're going to overlook that presumption and we think that this is something that would be allowed because we've considered it and we think it should be allowed under the circumstances given and with the conditions put upon the approval. If I was arguing this for a client, I would do like the applicant has done and said, I think this is a go. I mean, we're providing off-street parking. It's within the 500 feet. It is, we'll put up signage if you want us to put up signage. We're doing what we can to be good business owners and good neighbors in the community. It'll hopefully help a little bit, not completely prevent public spaces from being used up. Although we also know that people want the shortest distance to walk. And if there's an open space on the street, they're going to take it. They won't want to walk 300 feet or more from their car to the establishment, especially if they plan on drinking.
Right.
So, you know, there's a lot of pro and a lot of con here, and we have to decide if the pro is more. I think that the issue about setting a precedent is less concerning to me, because I don't foresee many opportunities for somebody to argue that we're just like this. Are there, you know, big parking lots around in residential zones? It has to be in a residential zone. That would be the first thing. If it's not parking in a residential zone, it's not like this case. So you'd have to find parking in a residentially zoned area that is within 500 feet of a commercial business in order to allow them to do, in order for them to say we should be approved because it's the same as that. I think that's a little more different. Now, what if somebody opens up next to this brew pub? You know, they're right next door and they are on a small lot. I haven't seen the right around that, but is there somebody that's still within 500 feet of St. Mark's? And could they say to the church, hey, the brew pub's only using 20 of your spaces on average. We've got a business. We want to use 10, 15 of your spaces. That still leaves you another 40 spaces open. Now, is that just like this? Maybe. And pretty soon the whole parking lot at the church is being consumed with commercial business patrons. Now you've got all kinds of people walking across the street, jaywalking and stuff. I don't know. I mean, it could happen.
Now I asked your opinion and you went on both sides of the issue.
Yeah, that's what a lawyer does. We look at it from both
Good
sides.
lawyer.
I may have to argue one way or the other in the future.
That's a lawyer.
If I'm not
Who
on the
said
board.
that? That's a lawyer.
And I don't want to presume that I'm going to vote one way because I have a client in mind or something like that. I don't. You know, but it could be there, but I don't have quite the concern that it's going to be similar enough. I tend to, in my opinion, I think it's a good thing to have, you know, to be able to allow this business to have parking off street, even though it's a couple hundred feet away from the business. I think they're going to work hard to show us and the community that they want this to work. I don't think they're just going to let their patrons wander in the dark in a sketchy alley. They're going to work hard to try to direct people to that lot, and they're going to try to work with the neighbors to, you know, make that alley a better place, make the neighborhood a better place so that everybody's happy and getting along. I mean, this isn't just a bar opening up. Some will, you know, it's going to have all kinds of problems. I think they're really, it sounds like their concept is such that it's going to be a much more, the patrons may be much more willing to abide by the rules and be careful with what they're doing. And, you know, it's not just going to be a free for all inside every night.
So if you look at where this lot is and where this building is, I want to use it, there are a couple other storefronts that are nearby that don't have any parking too.
Yeah.
Do we have any ability to put a requirement that they have an exclusive agreement with the church, that the church can't grant the same permission for their own parking lot to other businesses?
I don't think we can
do that,
consider,
right?
we can't put a restriction on somebody else's property when they haven't, they're not. We can't do that. We can only put restrictions on this property and its use.
And do keep in mind, there are other commercial properties around there, but there are commercial uses that are permitted by right. They can come and go from those buildings right now without any requirement for parking. This is only kind of a peculiar situation in that this is in front of this board for a special exception. And one of the requirements of the special exception is you have to comply with parking requirements, one option of which is getting variances. But So if somebody has the building 2 doors down from this facility and they're putting a insurance agency in it, let's just say, and they wanted some parking, we'll never know about it because it's a commercial zoning district and insurance office is permitted. It's not going to come in front of this body. They'll probably just strike some sort of handshake deal with a church and we'd never know about it.
Yeah. And the church has to consider how much, I mean, they're not getting paid for this. They said they're not getting anything in return for allowing this brew pub to use their spaces. So they have to decide how many people do we want parking on our parking lot. It may be okay to have this one business, but if every single, all similarly situated commercial establishments within a 500-foot radius start clamoring to use their spot, they're in control. They can say whether they want it or not. And then they, of course, if they still need the special exception, they'd have to come before us and we'd have to decide, is that a similar enough case to this that precedent would stand,
are we ready to vote on this parking lot then, Brian? Because we can't.
Do I have a motion to approve the special exception use? I mean, I think we need to go through. You're right. The first thing is to decide whether we want that, but we also still have to approve the other criteria that are applicable to a special exception. It's not just this parking.
You need to figure out what direction you're going with on the parking so you can effectively evaluate the special exception.
Mm-hmm. So is there a motion to allow?
Before you ask that, can I ask one question?
Okay. Yeah, please.
We have the recommended conditions that we could put on it that are in the document that we talked about. Are there any other conditions we would want to state as part of making the former statement of whether you want to go forward or not? Anybody have any other conditions you want to, or do we just simply go with those few that are listed there?
Do you have anything in mind, Jim?
I don't. I just want to make sure nobody else did.
Okay. And again,
I don't know how you're going to enforce any of it.
Yeah. Well, we can enforce it against the existing owner if it's something that is doable and they don't do it. We can't.
Right, but if one of it is signage and the patrons don't go down the alley.
Right. We can't. Yeah.
Right.
We can require them to put up signs, but we can't make their patrons comply.
Right.
Yeah. And we also can't put a condition in here that's going to bind another property owner. So like we can't say, yes, we allow them to use the parking, but nobody else can use this parking. We can't do that.
Would you be interested in a condition that would limit it specifically to a brew pub use, which is different than a general purpose tavern?
That would solve a lot of problems. Because if it's only for a brew pub use, that first of all, it protects this particular business in the future. If they change ownership, they're going to have that similar relationship with the church as long as the church wants to keep allowing it. And it would limit other businesses that are not brew pubs from being able to use that parking lot.
But why should brew pubs have priority to use that parking lot?
Well, because they're the only ones that have gotten permission from the church, and the church is in control of who they let use it. But we're in control of the decision to let it be used for this business. And I think making a condition that says we'll allow this arrangement to be used for brew pubs.
So if I want to put a winery in there, then that can't be done.
Well, you'd have to come back and go through the same process we're going through now.
Correct.
I think it would be easier for them to meet to get a board to agree. If we agree to this, if they're a similar business, winery. I mean, if you limit it to just brew pubs and you set it in stone like that, no, a winery would not be allowed.
The reason why I mentioned that is because it sounds like in some of your conversation, there was some concern, okay, this sounds all well and good, but what happened if the local fly-by-night bar decided to operate here?
Right.
So I suggested that as a way of addressing what I interpreted as some of the concern in your discussion.
Yeah. And that, I think, goes to what Jim was asking, is are there other conditions? And yeah, we can condition the condition that it's only, you know, that this lot is can be used. The off-street parking use, as it has been presented to us, is permissible for this brew pub, and only for this brew pub.
And I think it also narrows down the precedent that we're going to set too, as well.
Yeah. Makes it even harder to say.
Right.
Yeah.
But back to Steve. Steve, that's a thin line, all right, between a bar and a brew pub. What if they quit brewing?
That's not a brew pub then.
That's not a brew pub then. They got to
That's a
keep brewing
pub.
there.
Yeah, they have to have
Okay.
on-site. They have
That's
to
a
have
thin
on-site
line.
production of
Yes.
the alcoholic
Yes.
beverage that they've been
All right.
allowed by the. And you also have to remember the liquor board has some say in all this too. You know, when somebody applies for a license with the liquor board, you know, there's certain things that the liquor board's going to bring up. And if it's, you know, well, you don't have any parking, you know, where are you getting parking? Oh, there's a condition, you know, the Board of Zoning Appeals has said this particular lot can only be used for brew pubs. You're not a brew pub. I mean, you know, that's something that they would also have to satisfy the Board of License Commissioners for their liquor license. And they're a little bit more, and I don't say this in a bad way, freewheeling. They can deny stuff a little bit easier because they're concerned about the well-being of the communities in which the establishment is situated.
If you want to go in the direction of that condition, what I would probably put in your draft is that the use is limited to a brew pub, wine pub, or distillery pub. Emphasis on the word pub. That way you have to produce, that way we don't get into product, whether it's wine or beer or whatever.
Good point.
And that way to deal with Jim's question, well, what if a winery wanted to go in there? As long as they were doing some production as part of a wine pub, and we actually have those defined in the ordinance: a brew pub, wine pub, distillery pub, which is different than just, hi, we're selling alcohol.
Yeah.
And I would frame it that way for your review and consideration. Actually, you would probably want to, if you're interested in that, you probably would want to articulate that in your motion as a condition.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, so we'll find that in the definitional. We'll just make reference to the definitions.
So just to be clear, then that would limit any other business that would want to go in there if that building were to be sold.
What it would do with that condition in place, and the other conditions, presumably, if they're put in place, what that would be limited to, the special exception and the variance would be limited to the use of that space for a brew pub, a wine pub, or a distillery pub, not for any other special exception use, including general purpose taverns.
But like, what if a Bible store wanted to go in there?
A store is a permitted use in that district. They won't have to come to you to do that use there. It's a commercial zoning district, and you can do retail in that zoning district.
Okay. That clears it up for me. I mean, to me, that's a much different situation then.
The other types of businesses would be if somebody wanted to open a bistro, right? That requires on-site parking, that they would have to come back to this
Yes,
process.
yes. What it doesn't affect is a use that's permitted by right in that district, because the building's there. You can just go open up a store. If you don't have the parking, you don't have the parking. So any use that's permitted by right in that district, and then with this special exception, it would be limited to brew pub, wine pub, distillery pub. Any special exception use other than that would have to come back here.
I'm good with that.
Yeah.
Okay. So we are, I think we're pushing past the parking lot issue, that we attach appropriate conditions. that would restrict the business on this site. It has to be some sort, as the definitional terms for brew pub, distillery pub, or winery pub, and would allow the off-site parking in this at the St. Mark's Church. And the other conditions that we can talk about when we make the motion, the signage and so on. And then the other conditions or criteria of the consideration here for special exception, that it would not create any greater adverse impact than the operation of such use on any other property with the same zoning. So this is in a commercial district. It's a brew pub with apartments up above. Is this use going to create any greater adverse impact than the operation of such a use on any other property with the same zoning? We have other retail establishments with this zoning in the area. We have other commercial businesses and so is this creating an adverse impact, an increased or adverse impact, greater adverse impact, I should say? And I tend to think not. I think, you're going to have a few employees, your patrons, we've already addressed, they're going to be parking in the other lot perhaps. And then there's no, your residents above don't really play into the equation. They're parking on site. And that's that's part of that mixed use, the residential portion. You don't have to worry about that, but the commercial use, I don't think it's going to cause any adverse impact, greater adverse impact. Noise, lighting. Noise is always a concern. Is it going to cause more or less? This sort of brew pub versus maybe a tavern or a bar, I think it's going to be less.
Or a permitted by right use, like just a general purpose restaurant, which is permitted there.
Yeah, exactly. So you've got people coming and going who are consuming alcohol and other types of establishments just like this. So it really isn't any different. Same with the lighting and so on. You don't really have gases or stuff like that. You're brewing, but that's all natural stuff that's being vented out. CO2, I don't see that that's going to cause an adverse impact on the immediate neighborhood in a harmful way. And then the proposed activity will comply with all conditions and requirements set forth for specific use in that zoning district. And if they do comply, then they're not going to be causing a greater adverse impact, of course. I don't think there's going to be any visual impacts. It'll be nice to have a vacant storefront operational again. I think this used to be a car dealership, car sales.
It was built as a Studebaker or a Packard car dealership in the 20s. If
Oh
I
my
remember
gosh.
correctly.
Yeah.
Building's probably built like a fortress.
Yeah, I'll bet. So, you had people coming and going to buy cars. You had salespeople coming and parking there for the day. So I don't think there's going to be visually any problem. Odor, dust, smoke, gas, noise, or similar impact for surrounding properties. In my opinion, I think this would benefit the neighborhood rather than detract from it. Let's see. I think that's it. Any other discussion at this point? No questions, comments? Okay. Do we have a motion to approve this? Yes, Steve?
Just so we make sure we do this procedurally. It sounds like you're going to move forward with saying that the parking is okay. That means part of your motion is going to be to dismiss the variance application.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah, we don't need it in that case.
And then as you form your motion, presumably from what I'm hearing, it sounds like it's going to be an approval with conditions.
Conditions.
Make sure that you articulate your proposed conditions clearly.
Right. Okay, so we would want a motion, if we're in agreement, a motion to approve. I prefer not to move because I'm the chair. So I'm looking for a motion from someone.
Well, I guess I'm just, is this when you want all the conditions included in the motion?
Yes. Yeah, so if we are to, if we were to make an motion to approve, it would be a motion to approve with the use of the St. Mark's Church for off-site parking, and then with the conditions that that it's, I mean, Steve, can we simply reference the staff report for the conditions plus
Sure.
the limitation to the definitional terms of brew pub, winery pub, distillery pub?
Sure.
Okay. That way you don't have to read it all out and say it all out with your motion. So everybody got that? Somebody want to make a motion? Steve, can I make the motion? Is there anything that prohibits me from making the motion?
I think that's actually counter to the rules procedure.
Okay, I wasn't sure.
Typically chairs aren't supposed to move.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Give it to the
Or if
newbie.
somebody wants to make a motion to deny, somebody can make a motion to deny if they're really opposed to this. That's acceptable.
So we're approving the exception and basically doing away with the variance.
Yes.
All right. So I'll make a motion to approve the exception and do away with the variance based on the conditions that are in the staff report, as well as the condition that the business operating is either a brewer pub, a wine pub, or a distillery pub, tied to the condition that they have the approval from St. Mark's to use the parking.
Okay.
And the other conditions cited in the staff report, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
That's what he's indicated. Yeah.
I will second that motion.
Already is seconded. Do we have any other discussion?
Did that motion include a dismissal of the variance?
Yes.
Yes.
It did. Okay, I didn't catch that. Thank you.
Any other discussion before we move to a vote? Okay, I will call for a vote. Jordy,
I vote in favor of the motion.
Greg,
Boy, it's on the tip of my tongue. It's very tough for me, but I will approve.
you want me to pass? Okay.
No, I will approve.
Okay. All right. Janice?
Janice is recused.
She's not.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry, Janice. Aaron,
I approve.
Jim,
I approve.
and I also approve. Okay, so we have unanimous approval of the special exception, use of the parking lot with the conditions in the staff report as amended by Jim's motion. So good. Thank you, folks. That was a tough little mental gymnastic session, and both of them.
Now I got to actually write this thing.
Yeah. Well, you got a little time, Steve. I'd work on the other one real quick. That's an easier one.
Yeah.
The denial is an easier one. Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful month. Stay safe and healthy. And Steve, if you need me for anything, just give me a shout.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, folks.
Okay.
Bye.
Good night.
Thank you.
All right.
Good night.